Oh, that's right. Just general coverage in terms of getting ripped off by someone and getting the whole promise, because this happens with marketing agencies too. They promise, oh yeah, we're going to solve all your problems.
Well, I would want to ask a PR firm if they do more than just media, if they do more than just journalists, because I think modern PR, certainly journalists and media, is part of the toolkit. It's not the whole toolkit by any means. I got the good glass as well. I've got the Villeroy and Bosch. It's labelled brut, but definitely a little bit sweeter. Absolutely. I mean, 2 of my current clients came to me after being burnt by other agencies. And I don't want to, negative talk other agencies, but just in terms of people who maybe are looking to pay some money for professional PR support, in my opinion, just having the beers with the boys, like I said, that means they'll pick up the phone. It doesn't mean you'll get a story. What does mean you'll get a story is if you've got something that's worth saying. And sometimes the skill and the craft is figuring out how we can work with very little to amplify it up into something that is worth saying. The other thing I was going to say is you can sometimes not think laterally enough when it comes to approaching journalists. So because I work a lot with startups, a lot of startups know the journalists at the Fin Review who write the startup stories. And so sometimes I'll push back and say, well, look, what do you want as the outcome from getting this story in the Fin Review? Because if you want clients, are your clients, and if you're in the B2B space, are your clients really going to be reading the startup section of the newspaper? Or are they going to be reading the banking section of the newspaper? Or are they going to be reading the property section of the newspaper, or the health section of the newspaper, or the education section of the newspaper? And also at the bigger end of town, if you're, it is a very, there is a lot of that corporate bureaucracy in PR at the big end of town if you are working with bigger clients. So the firm that I'm part of, Reputation Edge, we have a really wide range of clients from some really big ASX quoted companies, and we work with them on their investor relations programs. That's a very different process. Despite my background in investment banking, I actually don't do that work. And I'm a little bit unusual for someone who works in PR in that my background is not journalism, my background is not media, my background's actually banking and finance. So that makes me a little bit unusual in the world of PR. A lot of people in PR used to be journalists. And so what they bring to the table is that they have very strong relationships with journalists. But that is not a guarantee of the journalist writing something. Having a good relationship with the journalist, it means they'll pick up the phone if you call them. It doesn't mean they're going to write something about your client simply because you've got that relationship with them. Look, first of all, you have to get to know them. And one of the reasons why I like LinkedIn is it's a way to practice and play. 150 words, 200 words, you can try something. Trying and working with the messages a little bit, because part of what I'm doing is crafting the messages. I'm trying to figure out what's going to make it really pithy and punchy. And I need a little bit of time to play with that and to get to know you. So I don't really hit my straps maybe until the end of my second month working with you, moving into the third month. I have some clients now, I've been working with them for quite a while, and there's things they just hand off to me. Because there's that level of trust and credibility. I do have a couple of I've got a graduate and intern who work with me, but a lot of the work I do myself, and I am the final line of quality control and assurance, and I manage my graduate and intern pretty closely. But I know in other agencies, something is just, thrown over to a junior, and there isn't much leadership, there isn't much guidance, because actually, unfortunately, the principal doesn't know that much either, because they're not, necessarily a specialist in education technology or, advertising technology or financial technology. I mean, it would be very hard to be a specialist in all these things. So they might be a specialist in startups, and they might have the ability to reach out to the journalists who write about startups. But is that the right place for your messages? If you're a B2B startup, are your clients going to be reading the startup pages? Or if you're a B2B startup in financial technology, are your clients going to be reading the finance pages? Or if you're in prop tech, they're probably going to be reading the pages that relate to their industry. So that means you need to go and talk to those journalists, not the startup and technology journalists. And that's a different discussion, because the journalists who cover finance and property, technology and the language of startups isn't their language. So they're going to need a bit of more time and effort to understand why this is a story that's going to be interesting to their readers. For that is I've very much specialised in the industries I already knew really well, like finance and property. And my secret sauce, I guess, is I can come up with the killer content. I can really nail the angle. I can really nail the news and the narrative, and I can talk about what's going on in the market. Initially, I find, you need to have a really good facility with words in PR, and you need to be able to cut through and find what is worth going on the page. You need to understand every word has to earn its place on the page. Most content that you produce or engage with is going to be short form content. It's going to be like a social media post, or maybe a blog, maybe an opinion piece. It's unlikely to be more than about 900 words, which isn't much. So you have to understand sometimes it's about what you leave out. It's about what you don't say and what you leave off the page, as much as what you do say and you do put down on the page. And that's something that you do just need a bit of experience and judgment. When you're younger and starting off, it is harder to know and have that judgment. And you can't be in the newspaper every week. I mean, if you're in the newspaper every week, you're probably in there for the wrong reasons, not the right reasons. I guess it just depends. Look, once a year, even for a scrappy startup, once a year being in, the Age or the Australian Financial Review is certainly not unrealistic. But there's also lots of other media. There's trade media, there's digital media, and there are lots of other ways to get that profile and that publicity. And look, this is one of the things that I actually really enjoy. I really enjoy working with the startups because it forces me to be a little bit more creative and not just rely on, calling up my journo buddies. One of the things that is harder about PR is we don't have metrics like CPM. You do tend to know who has good PR though. You tend to know who has good PR and who doesn't have good PR.